Hello, it is I, Broderick Wallace, and I do plan this to be a short video. Anything could happen, but it is quite a concise point that I want to make, especially to anyone engaged in meditation like myself, who's engaged in obviously in a daily practice, a regular thing, and is trying to push to new levels. And it's evident from this channel that I am on the path outlined by Franz Bardon. This is a training regime. This is something that has come my way through divine providence in a way. And I have a teacher who is extremely adept within this system. I belong to a school, an Hermetic school, and I find myself to be the only pagan in this group. As it stands. Now, one thing when you're engaged in the Hermetic study and practice, and bearing in mind there is a fusion going on between the Hermetic and the pagan styles in my life. Now, one figure, one god that has become extremely important to me and has great resonance, especially lately, is Odin, or Odin as it's apparently more properly pronounced, or Woden, the Anglo-Saxon, or going further into the Germanic, Wotanaz, or Wotan, all these names. Now, I'm not going to go into radical detail. I might do in the future, and I've laid this out elsewhere, which will appear later on. I'm very strongly influenced by the Kabbalistic tree, and the parallel is evident between the idea of the tree of the Kabbalah and the tree of Yggdrasil. In many religious systems, in many there's many descriptions and allusions to a kind of central pillar, and we can see this in the the caduceus, and it seems to relate to the spine and the golden chain and the image of the ladder, and this can be complicated or simple. If we get into the whole planetary thing with this can get more complicated. But if we just look at that central pillar, there is us as we are experiencing our our life from the physically embodied point of view. And as we go further up, there is this place which is symbolized by the sun, and as we move up further, there's like a kind of crossing point, and then we enter the realm of God. Now, Odin seems to also follow this kind of this triplicity, whereby it's said that you could run into Odin in daily life. You should be polite to vagabonds, etc., because this notion that Odin could be personified as a man is telling that we should consider ourselves to be Odin. Odin, it's notoriously fraught with trial and difficulty from the point of view that he is hung upon a tree, he sacrifices himself to himself in order to obtain the runes. Now this tree, the translation is, there is a mention of the word terror, which is not vitally important for this video, but more commonly, horse. So this tree is also Odin's steed. So the notion of riding this tree, which Odin is hanging from, which Odin has sacrificed himself to, there is the notion of a journey, and I would say, you know, an upward motion here. Now, the idea of sacrificing yourself to yourself, this speaks to me of clearing away everything except being. You're basically sacrificing yourself. In other words, all of your thoughts and opinions and notions of, you know, what you want, how you're feeling, just in meditation, or I mean specifically meditation though, let's get to the point here, but who's to say if this couldn't be achieved by actually hanging yourself from a tree, you know, and, you know, shamanic techniques are obviously implied, but I think it's safe to go with the idea of meditation. This would explain things. Now, this triplicity. So there you are. And how do you sacrifice yourself? Well, you get rid of everything except for being itself, consciousness. So you sacrifice yourself, you sacrifice everything going on in your mind. This relates to not thinking. This relates to obviously the Franz Bardon, clearing the mind of all thoughts, the void, vacancy of mind. This is worked up to in the book, but I'm not going to go into all the other details because this video will go on too long. Anyway, so in one particular session, I remember the word horsa being pronounced in my mind, and this is, you know, apparently Anglo-Saxon for horse, you know, Horsa and Hengist, you know, the legend. And once I was a little way in, I saw a vision of Odin, and he had his finger outstretched, a little bit like the, you know, the classic, you know, Renaissance painting, and his finger was stretching towards the surface of the water in which he was embedded, and I could see his grey hair underwater, and he was looking up, you know, towards the surface, this kind of mirrored surface, you know, as you can imagine, the top of the water. And as his finger touched the surface of the water, there was immediately another finger in an exact mirror image, two fingers touching, and a second Odin, exactly as the first. So this surface of water was like a kind of barrier point. Now, I couldn't think about this at the time because I'm busy not thinking, but on later reflection I realized that it's more than just my mind's way of interpreting things. But if we just look at my mind's way of interpreting things, it's beholding consciousness. It's like if you had two mirrors and, you know, placed them facing each other. That's another analogy, and the mirror is kind of an analogy for the mind, because it's reflecting everything around it. This relates to Mercury as well, because Mercury is this, you know, this silver coloured or coloured silver property, you know, substance that will take the form of any vessel, as Terence McKenna pointed out, which is a really like amazing insight, which I've always remembered and held on to. Mercury, like the mind, is completely reflective and will take the shape of any vessel in which it is poured into. In other words, any kind of mind, or rather brain, that it inhabits. So obviously it's going to be different in a human mind / brain than if we were, you know, in the mind of a bear or a fly or whatever. So within the human capacity, we have this ability of self-reflection. So this was the point of self-reflection. Now, I could go into stories of glimpses of, you know, beyond this point. It wouldn't be worth the trouble. But what I'm getting at is this very Indo-European description of the process of transcending normal consciousness. And you see, that's all you can't, you know, within the parameters of this video and what we're talking about, you know, that this is the obviously the ontological primitive consciousness itself. So the tree, Yggdrasil, is consciousness, and the sacrifice is, you know, the giving up of everything, obviously, because Odin is hanging, and you know, it's a very ascetic kind of idea, image. So the sacrifice of oneself to oneself creates this kind of mercurial image of the mirrored surface reflecting the mirrored surface. In other words, beholding one's own consciousness. What happens beyond that point? Well, that's a whole nother thing. But suffice to say, the more time that you spend reaching out in that engagement with non-thought, sacrificing yourself to yourself, riding the steed of consciousness, then the more some mysterious quality of emptiness fills your being. And this emptiness, this fulfilling void, is the process of change that, if we look at the story, the analogy would lead to wisdom, would lead to the retention of the runes, the winning of the runes, wisdom. Up there, so again, this triplicity. Odin as the self, Odin as the higher inspiration, the higher self, the HGA, and there is also a description of Odin being the, you know, the god of, you know, like poetry, this kind of thing, or ecstasy. Ecstasy means to stand outside of the self, the Greek word. And then Odin, the father of the gods, right there at the top of the pillar. We can see this expressed in the Kabbalah as Malkuth going up the central pillar to Tifereth, up into Kether. The Hermetic principle of ascending the ladder, bringing, you know, winning something, coming back down and bringing that prize back into ordinary daily life, this you know, bringing the fruits of meditation back into normal consciousness. And again, this juxtaposition, this nothing versus something, they define each other. So if you, to hold this, I mean, it's a good way of looking at things, and it's, I have, you know, through my own practice, been able to verify this interpretation. And strangely enough, the idea of the witch riding the broomstick, I've come across this before, I can't remember where exactly. You can see the parallel there. Anyway, I hope that made sense. It's quite late. My mind is beginning to tell me that it's time to sleep. So I hope that I found the right words